Shalom, this is Daniel Stern, and today we're going to talk about the bombshell that President Trump dropped yesterday regarding the Houthis in Yemen and all of that. But let's start a little bit earlier. So as we know, on Sunday morning, a Houthi missile landed near Ben Gurion Airport. And in response to that successful strike on Sunday, and the decision of many airlines to cancel their flights to and from Israel, Houthi spokesperson said that they will continue to strike Ben Gurion as well as other important targets. Haifa was mentioned, which is the port and other petrochemicals, so on and so forth, to create an air blockade on Israel. Yesterday afternoon, Israel executed another airstrike in Yemen, in Sana'a, in the port city, and specifically targeting their airport, the terminal, the runway. I understand that 3,200 meters of runway were destroyed, as well as planes on the ground. There are estimates ranging from $500 million and up to $1 billion in damage. Maybe if it's still a hot topic, in our next episode we'll go into detail about what was destroyed and its value. In addition to the airport, also power plants were destroyed, as well as a cement factory, and so on. And it should take between 8 months and 2 years to restore things to there, and obviously it has effects on gasoline and on hospitals and so on. It's worth noting that the IDF spokesperson in Arabic warned an hour before the strike in order to reduce civilian casualties. He's already well known in Lebanon and Gaza. I guess he's trying to get a little bit famous in other countries like Yemen. But here's the real thing. Yesterday evening, a bombshell was dropped by President Trump. He said that the Houthis in the U.S. will cease hostilities between each other, as well as the Houthis stopping to attack all the ships passing in that area. In further reports, it was made clear that none of this relates to their attacks on Israel, including Israeli ships, which will continue. And later, in a slightly later report, it came up that Oman, not Yemen, Oman was responsible for this agreement, for this negotiation. Nevertheless, the leader of the Houthis, Muhammad Ali al-Houthi, explained that the Houthi actions have always been and continue to be in support of Gaza and against Israel's aggression against the Gazans. And that as far as they're concerned, this cessation of hostilities with the U.S. is a victory for them. They made the U.S. stop attacking them. And they will continue to attack Israel. He also added that Netanyahu is a weak leader who should resign. Okay. The Houthis still have dozens of missiles and produce about a handful per week in their underground facilities. So they're still capable of continuing their attacks on Israel, which, when they happen, usually send 500,000 to 3 million people into bomb shelters. What message does this send to Iran and to the world? That it's okay to attack Israel just as long as you leave the U.S. out of it. And anyways, moving on to Gaza. As follow-up to last episode's reports about Netanyahu saying that the war will end in October, shy of 2 years from when it started, and Netanyahu's advisor and Ron Derner saying that it will end in victory in 12 months so that we will be able to create, achieve, facilitate more peace treaties. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, also weighed in, and he says that we'll be able to claim victory in just a few months. Additionally, he also stated that Gaza will be destroyed and its residents will all be moved south of the Morag line. I'll remind you, the Morag line is a relatively new line that was created. It's parallel to the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt. It goes between the Egyptian Rafah and the Gazan Rafah. And it exists north of the city of Rafah and south of the city of Khan Yunis. And from there, large numbers of the Arabs in Gaza will exit to other countries. There will be 3 points of distribution centers in Rafah, that through it the humanitarian aid will be handed out to the residents of this area. Although it's worth noting that the UN said that it and its workers and all the NGOs in Gaza will not cooperate with Israel or the US in its plans for this humanitarian aid distribution. So obviously we can see here that the UN and all these NGOs are actually political and are not necessarily in favor of the poor residents of Gaza who need their food and humanitarian aid, because they're unwilling to cooperate with Israel in order to achieve this. Egyptian sources said that they received a new negotiation offer with simpler conditions from the United States, who want a ceasefire before Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia sometime around May 13th to 15th. And that this would involve opening of humanitarian corridors, the release of some but fewer than previous negotiation hostages, including the US citizen Idan Alexander, and receiving clear information on the remaining hostages, as well as proof of them, those who are not released, receiving medication. Israeli sources say they have not received or heard any of these new offers. Moving on to Syria, French President Macron says that he will host Syrian President Shara's first European visit, thus legitimizing this unelected jihadist. I mean, the previous guy wasn't elected either, and neither was his father, and they ruled for 50 years as a dictatorship, but this guy is also unelected. What else? Turkey is calling up reservists for a second, only 2 weeks apart, which is quite odd, large training exercise focusing on its air force. And with that, we must remind that the Syrian Kurds are still in conflict with the new Syrian regime. And the new Syrian regime, as we mentioned last episode, has a big conflict with the Druze, and obviously Israel are also involved. And I mentioned last episode that the Turkish Air Force came in contact with the Israeli Air Force during Israel's airstrikes. Updated report on that says that it was actually Turkish drones and not manned planes. But in any case, an exercise involving the Turkish Air Force could be an indication of intent. It's worth noting that the whole Syria crisis relates to which country will be the major power in the region and have the hegemony in the area, between Israel, Iran, and Turkey, and to a lesser extent Saudi Arabia as it relates to this part, Syria. Iran has extended its influence into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, and more. And then Israel gave them a good beating, and as a result, their influence in Syria and Lebanon was severely undermined. Now, Turkey is very carefully trying to create an ISIS proxy under its control with its jihadist HTS forces in Syria. And if that works, they will likely expand to Lebanon, Iraq, and onward. Israel has to be very, very careful, because by weakening or removing the HTS regime, it might allow Iran back in. And I've said this before, but what Israel would like to see in Syria is a federation, which has less central power and different autonomous zones to the different groups there, the Kurds, the Alawites, the Druze, and so on. And that way, the country will be less of a threat to Israel, and also will itself have less external influence on it. Because if it's a federation of autonomous zones, then each of those federations could be influenced by different countries, Turkey, Iran, Israel, and so on. Now, I have to make a correction from last episode, where I said that the Israel Air Force bombed the Syrian presidential palace. But actually, they bombed close to it and not the palace itself, as a warning of what they could do if they wanted to. And as you know, I do my best to give you all the news correctly. Yes, I'm quite biased, as I'm sure you can tell, and that's fine, and I don't mind admitting it, but I do try to be as honest as I can with the news. And if I made a mistake, please correct me, and I will, if need correcting, do so, just like now. Thank you for the gentleman in the comments of last episode that corrected me. I appreciate it very much. There's always lots of updates regarding the judicial and legislative matters in Israel with the DA and the head of the General Security Service and so on, but it seems like we never get around to talking about it. Hopefully, we'll get a chance sometime soon, because there's a lot of updates in that regard. Now, as always, if you like this, share, subscribe, click like, comment, engage with us. If you have any ideas for something here in Israel that you want me to talk about, I'd be glad to do so. Thank you very much, and God bless you all. Shalom.